Doctor Who, The Past Doctor Adventures Books Review. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final video in this range where I'll be looking at Doctor Who fiction, because I haven't bought or read any of the post-new series ones from late 2005 onwards. These were pretty much the last range of books that I bought. So let's take a look. The Past Doctor Adventures ran from 1997 to 2005 after the BBC Books had taken the license back from Virgin Publishing, who'd made original Doctor Who fiction a success, so they rewarded them by stealing the license back, as you do. There were 76 books in the series, all of which featured past pre-8th Doctor, although the 8th Doctor did turn up in a couple of them anyway. There were 8 books with the 1st Doctor, 12 books with the 2nd Doctor, 12 books with the 3rd Doctor, 13 books with the 4th Doctor, 10 books with the 5th, 11 with the 6th, and 13 with the 7th. The first book in the range was The Devils Goblins from Neptune by Martin Day and Keith Topping, featuring the 3rd Doctor, Liz Shaw, and Unit. The Season 7 setting has been surprisingly underexploited by original Doctor Who fiction. I think there were like 2 in the Missing Adventures, weren't there? There were like The Scales of Injustice and Eye of the Giant, and there's maybe 2 in this range. Honestly, you'd think there'd be more from, because I mean it's a really popular season and a ripe setting for really kind of dark and gritty sci-fi thrillers, and yet there aren't really as many as you'd think there'd be. The Devils Goblins of Neptune is pretty average. Honestly, it's not the greatest start for the range. Much like the 8 Doctors wasn't the greatest start for the 8th Doctor range. These authors just don't really do it for me, to be honest with you. At least in this one, anyway. The next book is Steve Lyons, which is the 2nd Doctor story. I think it's and features Ben and Polly. I think this is the first original one to have Ben and Polly without Jamie. Wasn't Jamie in Invasion of the Cat People? It's a very long time ago, so I can't remember. This is basically like an old school space station mystery. It's pretty good, if not particularly remarkable, but it feels like Doctor Who, and it's an entertaining read if you're just looking to kill a couple of hours. The next story is The Ultimate Treasure by Christopher Bulis, which is a 5th Doctor and Perry book. I don't think I read this. If I did, I don't remember anything about it. Granted, that's not particularly surprising with Christopher Bulis, but no, I don't think I bought this one or read this one, which is odd because I did, unlike the 8th Doctor ones, I did kind of get or read the majority of these, I think, and certainly the early ones. But I guess maybe I just didn't get it because I wasn't a fan of Bulis, honestly. And at this time I was starting to wean myself off having to buy absolutely everything that came out, you know. The next book in the series is Business Unusual by Gary Russell, which features the 6th Doctor, Mel, and the Brigadier. Again, Gary Russell is one of these writers who's kind of readable, and yet you completely forget what you've read the moment that you've finished reading it, because there's just nothing particularly remarkable about it. This was okay. The next book, and probably the best in the range so far, is A Legal Alien by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry. Mike Tucker being the special effects guy who worked on the McCoy era and at least some of the Davis era. This is a 7th Doctor and Ace book featuring the Cybermen, are set in World War II. This was actually a script that Mike Tucker had been developing, possibly for use in season 27, which never happened. Thanks, BBC. So he adapted it into a book, and it's not bad. It's pretty good. It's probably the best of the range thus far. It feels like very much like a Sylvester McCoy TV story, unlike a lot of the New Adventures, especially the later New Adventures, which didn't really feel like Doctor Who at all. But yeah, it's pretty good. The next one is The Roundheads by Mark Gatiss, which is a 2nd Doctor story with Ben, Polly, and Jamie, and is basically a pure historical. I don't have this. I think I got it from the library. I don't remember a thing about it. Mark Gatiss is just one of those writers who started off so spectacularly with Nightshade and then just kind of settled for perpetually mediocre. Oh well. The next one is The Face of the Enemy by David A. McKinty. This, I think, is actually... No, this is set sometime in Season 8, isn't it? It's set sometime in Season 8 because it's got the Master in it, but it kind of feels a lot... It's got a very Season 7 feel to it because it turns out to be a sort of semi-sequel to Inferno. It's not bad, actually. I've got on record as saying I'm not a big fan of this writer. A lot of his books have interesting premises, but the prose style kind of killed them for me. But I quite like this one. It's basically a Season 7 style unit story. But I think the Third Doctor's not in it. I think he and Jo are off on one of their jaunts. And the unit are forced to kind of rope in the Master. I mean, maybe it's Season 9 then, because maybe he's in custody or something. I can't remember. It's a long time ago. But I do remember it being pretty good. The next one is Eye of Heaven by Jim Mortimer, which is a Fourth Doctor and Leela adventure. It's sort of like a quest adventure or something like that. I think Easter Island's got something to do with it. I don't have this one. I did get it from the library. It made very little impression on me, as is often the case with, again, this writer. Sorry. The next one is The Witch Hunters by Steve Lyons, which is a First Doctor, Ian Barber and Susan story. It's a pure historical, and it's the Salem witch trials. And it's actually pretty good. I mean, I didn't really think much to a lot of the First Doctor stories in the Missing Adventures range, with basically the exception of the Plotters. Like the Plotters, this is basically a pure historical, but the Plotters was kind of a tongue-in-cheek Roman-style historical, whereas this is a much more darker and serious historical. And it's pretty good. I mean, you can really believe that they could have done this subject in the Hartnell era, because they did historicals and they didn't pull many punches with them, in terms of showing how dark history could be. Yeah, this was pretty good. The next one is The Hollow Men by Martin Day and Keith Topping, featuring the Seventh Doctor and Ace, and it's basically a sort of a semi-sequel to The Awakening. It's basically horrible things going on in a small English village, and there's killer scarecrows and all that sort of thing, and it's pretty good. I mean, again, I'm not a big fan of these authors, but this one is actually easily their best. Yeah, it's just, if you like a good old English village horror story, and you want a bit of McCoy and Ace action, yeah, this hits the spot. It feels like a TV story, like a Seventh Doctor story, and a thoroughly enjoyable one. The next book in the series is Catastrophia by Terrance Dicks. This is the Third Doctor and Jo stories on an alien planet, and Ogrons are in it. Again, I didn't buy this one. I did rent it, borrow it. I seem to remember it being spectacularly average. This is very much Terrance Dicks kind of on autopilot, I think. Yeah, I mean, his work for the Virgin books was pretty damn good for the most part. Certainly Exodus and Blood Harvest were among the highlights of that range. After that, he kind of just seemed to be kind of, churning them out a bit. This is a bit, to be honest. Very unmemorable. The next one is Mission Impractical by David A. McKinty, which is a Sixth Doctor and Frobisher story. The comic book companion, the shapeshifter who's stuck in the shape of a penguin. And it's also got Glitz and Dibber in it. Again, I wasn't a big fan of this writer a lot of the time, but I thought Mission Impractical was pretty fun. It was meant to be a bit of tongue-in-cheek kind of adventure fun, as you can gain from the title, and it wasn't bad. It's pretty entertaining. Not bad at all. The next one is Zeta Major by Simon Messingham. I think it's with the Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa. I think it's like a semi-sequel to Planet of Evil. I don't think I bought this one or read it, actually. It didn't sound very interesting, and he wasn't one of my favourite writers, so I was like, eh. The next one is Dreams of Empire by Justin Richards. Second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria. Again, never read it. The next one is Last Man Running by Chris Boucher, who of course wrote Face of Evil, Robots of Death and Image of the Fendel on telly. It's a Fourth Doctor and Leela story, as you might expect. I rented this, I read it, borrowed it. It wasn't particularly memorable. The next one is Matrix by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry, again featuring the Seventh Doctor and Ace, and it's set in Victorian London, and it's got the Balyard in it, like Jack the Ripper stuff. It was surprisingly disappointing, as I recall. I really liked Illegal Alien. This one did not really do anything for me. Sorry. The next book in the series is The Infinity Doctors by Lance Parkin, which features an unspecified incarnation of the Doctor. I never read it, sorry. The next one is Salvation by Steve Lyons, featuring the First Doctor, Stephen and Dodo. Never read it. The next one is The Wages of Sin by David A. McKinty, featuring the Third Doctor, Joe and Liz. Never read it. The next one is Deep Blue by Mark Morris. It's a Fifth Doctor, Tegan, Turlough and Unit story. I was kind of intrigued by this. I think at this point I was definitely being very selective in terms of which books I could be bothered to buy. Some of the reviews for this, it just sounded like it's like a seaside. It's set in the 70s, so it's like it's 70s Unit with the brig in, but the Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Turlough are in it, and it's like a seaside horror story with sea monsters and it kind of intrigued me, that premise and those characters, that kind of team up, and some of the reviews, I think, just kind of intrigued me, and I picked it up, even though I don't think I'd been particularly impressed with Morris's previous one, which was The Body Snatchers. But I really, really liked this one. It's a full-on gothic horror, basically. You know, rampaging monsters and a fun kind of Unit out of time Doctor team up. It's just really, really enjoyable. If you love a Doctor Who doing horror, yeah, this was really good, and I kind of made a mental note to look out for Mark Morris after that. The next one is Players by Terence Dix, which features the Sixth Doctor and a kind of extended cameo for the Second Doctor and Perry. It's about a bunch of people who mess around with time or something. They're the Players, and it's got the extended cameo by the Second Doctor is kind of after the War Games, kind of pseudo canonizing the season 6B idea. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And again, as with Catastrophia, this one's readable, but it's very forgettable. The next book in the series is Millennium Shock by Justin Richards, which features the Fourth Doctor and Harry. I think this is the Fourth Doctor on his own between like Assassin and Face of Evil, and it's kind of like a slightly later version of Harry. This is a sequel to A Missing Adventure. This is a sequel to the same author's System Shock in the Missing Adventures books. I thought System Shock was okay, but I really liked Millennium Shock. I actually thought this was much better. I thought this took all the good things about System Shock and just improved on them and made it's a really kind of gripping sci-fi techno thriller. I really, really enjoyed Millennium Shock. So that's another definite recommend. The next one is Storm Harvest by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry. I think this is their last. And it's the Seventh Doctor and Ace. Again, it's basically like a base under siege, I think. Again, there's some kind of, on some future planet, there's some kind of seaside resort and there's sea monsters. Kind of like Deep Blue, only nowhere near as good. This was okay. It's better than Matrix. I still think Illegal Alien was the best one that they did. It's more readable than Matrix. It's okay, I suppose. The next one is The Final Sanction by Steve Lyons, which has the Second Doctor, Jamie and Zoe. Never read it. The next one is City at World's End by Christopher Bewlis, featuring the First Doctor, Ian Barber and Susan. Never read it. The next one is Divided Loyalty by Gary Russell, which features the Fifth Doctor, Adric, Nyssa, and Tegan, and it's also got the Celestial Toymaker in. That's not a spoiler because you can pretty clearly see him on the cover. I have read this one. It wasn't particularly good. It was very much standard Gary Russell kind of fan fiction. The prose is readable, but the story is very unmemorable, in my opinion. The next one is Corpse Marker by Chris Boucher, featuring the Fourth Doctor and Leela. I think it's like a sequel to Robots of Death. I never read it. I was really disappointed by his Last Man Running, so I just couldn't. And all these fan fiction sequels, I'm not really a fan of that sort of thing. Didn't do it for me. The next one is Last of the Gadarene by Mark Gatiss. It's basically a Third Doctor, Joe and Unit Master, kind of like it's very much a love letter to the Pertwee era, the mid-Pertwee era. Again, I think I bought it because I like the Third Doctor in that era. But as with a lot of Mark Gattis's, it just feels very kind of very by the numbers. The next one is The Tomb of Valdemir by Simon Messingham, featuring the Fourth Doctor, Romana 1 and K9. Don't think I ever read it. Certainly didn't buy it. The next one is Verdigris by Paul Margaret. It features the Third Doctor and Joe and that Iris Wildtime character. I read this. The Paul Margaret style doesn't do anything for me, even though it kind of should, because he's kind of tongue-in-cheek humour, and I like tongue-in-cheek humour, Doctor Who, but his style just leaves me kind of cold, honestly. The next one is Gravemata by Justin Richards, featuring the Sixth Doctor and Perry, and it's basically a gothic horror story on an isolated island off the English coast, and it's zombies, basically. It's Doctor Who does zombies, the living dead, and it's really good. It's really fun. Justin Richards, not a writer I was that keen on when he started, but by this point he really knew what he was doing, and he was churning out some really entertaining and fun stories. And this, if you want a Sixth Doctor gothic horror, which he never really got on television, absolutely Gravemata, great fun. The next one is Heart of Tardis by Dave Stone. This one features the Second Doctor and the Fourth Doctor, as well as Jamie Victoria and the First Romana. Now, I very nearly didn't get this because Dave Stone's other stuff, his New Adventures and his Missing Adventures, I think he did 1 or 2 Missing Adventures. Again, as with Paul Margaret, I kind of got the feeling I should like his stuff, and I never really did. It just didn't jive with me. But I was kind of intrigued by the mashup and by the premise, I think. And I picked this up, and I actually really liked this one, shockingly enough. It's easily my favourite Dave Stone Who story that I read. I found it kind of very entertaining. Even with the mashup, I don't know. It's much easier to follow than a lot of his, and the humor it's not kind of too over the top to the point where you can't concentrate on the story, but it gives it a kind of a fun quality to it. I really dug Heart of Tardis. The next one is Primetime by Mike Tucker, this time on his own. And again, it's Seventh Doctor and Ace. This was not very good. This was very much reminded me of Matrix in that I just really didn't care what was happening. Didn't do it for me, sorry. The next one is Imperial Moon by Christopher Bulis, which features the Fifth Doctor, Turlo and Chameleon. I never read this one. The cover's kind of intriguing with kind of that, the moon being made of something else, not an egg. Kind of in reference to that, the early silent movie, whose name I can't quite remember at the moment. I was intrigued by that idea, but I didn't kind of buy this because I wasn't really a fan of Bulis' stuff. It just never really appealed to me. The next book in the series is Festival of Death by Jonathan Morris, which is a Fourth Doctor, Romana 2 and K9 book. I think this is the only Fourth Doctor, Romana 2 and K9 book in the whole of the past Doctor adventures, because Gareth Roberts' ones in the Missing Adventures had left such a huge kind of... They'd set such a high bar. I think a lot of writers were really intimidated to even try, because they were always going to get compared. But this is Jonathan Morris, and I don't know whether this came before or after the Tomorrow windows, possibly before. But I kind of picked it up because obviously I love season 17. I love the Fourth Doctor, Romana 2 and K9. And this is a fantastic book. This is one of my favourite past Doctor adventures. It kind of leaves you scratching your head and wondering why the hell didn't they get Morris to do some more, especially some more, with this team, because this guy was the successor to Gareth Roberts. This is a great book, well up there with Roberts' best. It's better than The Well-Mannered War, in my opinion, a lot better. It's very fun, very imaginative. It's got a kind of slightly darker quality to it than a lot of Roberts' work too. Some of the stuff in it is really quite existentially horrifying, especially the ending. But yeah, this is easily one, and it definitely marked Morris out as a writer that I was going to pay attention to. I think this probably came first. That's probably why I picked up the Tomorrow windows, because I wasn't really reading the Eighth Doctor books at that point. But he kind of made me want to pick it up. If you've never read Festival of Death, I highly recommend it. The next book is Independence Day by former Virgin New Adventures and Missing Adventures editor Peter Darvill Evans, featuring the Second Doctor and Seventh Doctor and the Jamie and Ace. Okay. I have never read this. Looking at this, I don't even remember hearing about it. I've never read it. Okay. The next one is The King of Terror by Keith Topping. Features the Fifth Doctor, Tegan Turlough and the Brigadier. Don't think I've ever read it. If I did, I must have borrowed it. No, sorry. Doesn't ring a bell. The next one is The Quantum Archangel, featured by Craig Hinton, featuring the Sixth Doctor and Mel. Don't think I ever read it. If I did, didn't like it. The next one is Bunker Soldiers by Martin Day, featuring the First Doctor, Stephen and Dodo. It's kind of a dark historical. This was okay. Probably the best solo book by Martin Day, I think. I don't remember too much about it, but I think it was reasonably good. I still think The Witch Hunters was the better First Doctor historical, but it was okay. The next one is Rags by Mick Lewis, featuring the Third Doctor, Joe and Unit, and this is a very controversial book, very hated, one of the most hated Doctor Who books of all time, apparently, I have discovered, because it's a full-on, gory, no-hold-barred, bloody horror. Needless to say, I fucking loved Rags, and I still love Rags. I do kind of get why it's unpopular. I'm not sure it's really a Doctor Who book, honestly. And if it is, I'm not sure it really suits this team. This kind of thing seems to me to be more suited to kind of like a Hinchcliffe setting, or maybe even a late Sylvester and Sophie setting. Doesn't really seem to suit this team, and they don't really have that much to do either. It makes it a little bit dubious. But as a horror novel, and certainly I don't really read very much in general these days, but certainly in the 90s and the early 2000s, I was a full-on horror novel reader, and as a horror novel, Rags was fucking kick-ass. I loved it. I think it's extremely well written, and it's not just because it's like gory as fuck, which it is, but just from the opening page, there's a sense of dread. A sense of dread and impending horror fills this book from beginning to end. I love it. It's got tremendous menace. Again, I can understand why some people don't like it, especially the Doctor fans, and especially those who are squeamish and have never read a proper horror novel in their life. But for someone like me, who in the 90s was devouring the work of the likes of Richard Lehman, now that guy was one sick fuck. Who's sicker, the guy that writes it or the guy that reads it? Yeah, I love Drags. Sorry. Hate to be a contrary bastard. That's not true. You know I love being a contrary bastard. Now then, we start to get into a period that, I think I started skipping a lot at this point. The Shadow in the Glass by Justin Richards and Stephen Cole. It's the Sixth Doctor and the Brig one. I think it's something to do with bringing back Hitler or something. I seem to vaguely remember this. I think I read it and I think it was okay, but I don't think it was one of the best. It's been a very long time. The next few, I haven't really read a lot of these. Asylum by Peter Darvill Evans, Fourth Doctor and Nyssa. Superior Beings by Nick Walters with the Fifth Doctor and Perry, Byzantium. Keith Topping. No, I've not read any of these. Bullet Time by David A. McKinty with the Seventh Doctor and Sarah. I think I've read this. I think it was okay as a sort of techno thriller. It was okay, I think. Science Fiction by Chris Boucher with the Fourth Doctor and Leela again. No, I never read it. Dying in the Sun, Instruments of Darkness. No, never read it. The next one I read was Relative Dementias by Mark Michalowski by the Seventh Doctor and Ace, with the Seventh Doctor and Ace. Sort of like some kind of creepy story set in an old folks' home, I think. I don't recall it being very good. The next one was Drift by Simon A. Forward, featuring the Fourth Doctor and Leela. It's kind of a horror story set in the snow or something. Again, I think it was okay. A nice setting. Not very memorable. Palace of the Red Sun by Christopher Bewley, featuring Sixth Doctor and Perry. Never read it. A Morality Tale by David Bishop, featuring the Third Doctor and Sarah. I think I read this. It's set in like in the 50s with the killer Smog in London, isn't it? And of course, there's some kind of alien involvement. I think that was okay. Warmonger by Terrence Dix, Fifth Doctor and Perry. I never read this. 10 Little Aliens by Stephen Cole, First Doctor, Ben and Polly. I never read it. Yeah, it was very much at this time that I was really starting to kind of go off them, honestly. The next one is Combat Rock by Mick Lewis, featuring the Second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria. I think he was being deliberately perverse, actually, in choosing the Tardis teams that didn't really suit the gory horror stories he was doing. I snapped up Combat Rock because I love Drags. I was really disappointed by it. It's definitely got second album problems. Again, everybody hates this. I have to say I did not like it. And I didn't like it because it offended my delicate sensibilities. I just didn't think it was very interesting. It just didn't, to me, it wasn't as interesting as a premise. And it just didn't have the same kind of atmosphere and sense of dread that I thought Rags had. Yeah, it didn't work for me. I was really disappointed by that because after Rags, I really had my eye on Mick Lewis as a writer to follow, because obviously at this point I was getting very, very, very picky as to what I was going to buy, because it kind of felt like these books were going on forever, and many of them were just thoroughly mediocre. So it was like I was being very selective and only picking out certain authors or ones that had a particularly great premise. I was disappointed by that. The next one is The Sons of Karish, Third Doctor and Joe by Paul Saint. Never read it. Heritage by Dale Smith, featuring the Seventh Doctor and Ace. Isn't this the one with an older Melin? And she dies or something on some desert planet? I did not like it at all. I mean, it was rubbish. The next one is Fear of the Dark by Trevor Baxendale, featuring the Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa. By this point, Trevor Baxendale was one of those writers that I was keeping my eye on. And Fear of the Dark is an absolute cracker. If you just love a good, proper Doctor Who, base under siege horror story with some existential Lovecraftian menace, pick up Fear of the Dark. I love Fear of the Dark. Absolutely gripping read. Again, it's a shame, that the Davison era did not have a few more like this on actual telly, or any like this on actual telly. Yeah, I love Fear of the Dark. Absolute cracker. More, when I say it's a horror story, it's more, more Doctor Who horror rather than the hardcore horror of Rags. It's Doctor Who, and it's Doctor Who being scary, and I really liked it. The next one was Blue Box by Kate Orman. I think this is her only past Doctor missing adventure one, with the Sixth Doctor and Perry. Basically a kind of techno thriller set in the US. I thought this was pretty good, actually. I wasn't a massive fan of Orman. Some of them are good, some of them really bored me. I thought Blue Box was surprisingly readable and entertaining, and just, yeah, it was a good time. Next one is Loving the Alien. I said, no, I'm wrong. Yet another one by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry, featuring the Seventh Doctor and Ace. I don't think I've read this, so if I did, I didn't like it. Doesn't this kill Ace or something at the end? I was not a fan either way. The next one is The Colony of Lies by Colin Brake. It's another mashup, Second Doctor and Seventh, with Jamie, Zoe and Ace. I don't think I've read this. No. Next one is Wolfsbane by Jacqueline Rayner, featuring the Fourth and the Eighth Doctor, as well as Harry and Sarah. It's sort of a werewolf story. I bought this because that sounds well up my, Doctor Who, gothic horror, werewolves, sounds well up my, flagpole. It didn't do anything for me at all. I'm sorry. I found this really, really, really dull. Deadly Reunion is next by Terence Dix and Barry Lett. It's a Third Doctor, Joe and Unit story. That does not sound familiar at all. Let me just look at the cover. I do not recognize that at all. I don't have it. If I ever rented it or borrowed it, I certainly don't remember it. The next one is Stream of the Schalke by Paul Cornell. It's obviously the novelisation of the cartoon with Richard E. Grant in it. Never read it. Didn't like the cartoon. Empire of Death by David Bishop, featuring the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa. Never read it. 11th Tiger by David McKinty. First Doctor, Ian Barber and Vicky. Never read it. Synthespians by Craig Hinton, Sixth Doctor and Perry. I've read this one. I don't know whether I bought it or not. I've read it. It's kind of an Auton story, I think. It was readable, just very unmemorable. Algebra of Ice by Lloyd Rose, Seventh Doctor and Ace. Never read it. Indestructible Man, Simon Messingham, Second Doctor, Jamie and Zoe. Never read it. Match of the Day, another Boucher one with Fourth and Leela. Never read it. Island of Death by Barry Letts, Third Doctor and Sarah. Don't think I've read it. Spiral Scratch by Gary Russell, Sixth Doctor and Mel. Supposed to be the last Colin Baker story, which Big Finish have done a completely different version of. It was readable and utterly forgettable, as you'd expect. Fear Itself by Nick Wallace, like an Eighth Doctor book. I guess that the Eighth Doctor books had ceased publication at this point. I think I read this. I think it was just as boring as many of the Eighth Doctor books. Next was World Game by Terence Dix. Another Second Doctor one. It's another one post-War Games, like a full-on one this time, post-War Games. I think I read this. It was okay. Again, as with a lot of the later Dix ones, they're efficiently written and they keep you reading, but you don't really remember them afterwards. Next up is The Time Travellers by Simon Guerrier, First Doctor, Ian Barber and Susan. Never read it. And the last one was Atom Bomb Blues, which was written by Andrew Cartmel, series script editor of the McCoy era, and predictably had the Seventh Doctor and Ace in. He wrote the War trilogy for the New Adventures, which did not feel very Doctor Who-y, but were very well written and very gripping sci-fi thrillers. So I picked this one up. I was kind of disappointed by it, much like Gareth Roberts ending the Missing Adventures. I expected more from the author and given the team. It was just kind of very ordinary. Yeah, the Missing Adventures, like the Eighth Doctor books, the Missing Adventures took place at a time when my interest in original Doctor Who fiction was starting to wane. I think there are more good books in the PDAs than the Missing Adventures, but then that's probably because there's like twice as many. So, I think there's only like 31 or something, and there's 70 odd. So it's not surprised that there are more better ones, but there's probably more mediocre ones as well. Standouts that I would recommend are Illegal Alien, Witch Hunters, Hollow Men, Deep Blue, Millennium Shock, Gravemata, Heart of Tardis, Festival of Death, Rags, providing you're not a squeamish wussball, Fear of the Dark, possibly Blue Box. That's probably it, actually. Yeah, that's probably it, actually. Fear of the Dark and Blue Box are like the last two punch, really decent ones after that. Yeah. Oh well, anyway. And after this, I've never read any of the new series ones. I think I got one of the big hardback, the Wheel of Ice thing, or maybe it was Harvest of Time, with the Second Doctor in, one of the mid-2010s ones. I rented it from the library. I never finished it. Really boring. Didn't feel very much like Doctor Who to me. And I never read any of the new series ones. As you can probably tell, my interest was starting to wane during the BBC books time. Just because there were so many, there's two a month, and half the time they were very mediocre. But there are some good ones in there. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and all these videos of me going through these books and saying never read it, crap. I guess I'm going to have to think of something else for next time. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.